Hello, good day and welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn session on Introduction to Facility Management Standards and in particular BSI EN ISO 41001. I think I have control of this pack. As the robot lady will have said as we joined, you are in listen only mode, but this is a live event. So please do interact via the questions feature, and we will answer as many of your questions as we can at the end of our 3 presentations. And to try and preempt the most common question, yes, a recording of this session is being made, and a copy of that and the slides will be available on the BSI website. So any colleagues that couldn't attend or those that had such a great time, they want to relive it, can have the experience again. Indeed, when I checked yesterday, I was able to go back and see webinars that we did 2 or 3 years ago. So they're on there for some time. I've also been asked to highlight that there is a survey that gets sent out at the end of our webinar, and that helps BSI and us understand how we did and what we'd like to see more of and what would you like to see less of. My name is Nick Blake. I chair BSI's technical committee, FMW1. And I also sit on the strategic committee for FMB1. My J job, so to speak, is associate director for Gardner and Theobald's specialist FM procurement and business process improvement consultancy team. And I'm going to be starting things off for us today with a short talk about what standards are and how they come about and what they can be used for. But it's not just my dulcet tones that you will have to put up with. We also have 2 more fantastic speakers. Adrian, who is chair of FMB1, he's going to be speaking to us about our infographic and sharing some insights into a range of the available FM standards we have that are mostly already available to us and a few that are still in production. And we're rounding things out with Brian. You can also see up on screen now. Brian sits on both of the FM standards committees for BSI and has supported the groups with drafting many of our standards. He's going to be sharing some insightful perceptions of ISO 41001, FM's answer to ISO 9001. So I'm going to turn off my camera now. We're going to jump into the presentation. Let's see a little bit more of the screen. We've got a couple. My first role today is to help myth bust standards and their creation, specifically FM standards, and also what they're used for. We're going to start with the organizations responsible for writing standards. BSI, our hosts, are recognized as the world's first national standards body and one of the most prolific standards creators. You're seeing on screen a tiny selection of the NSBs around the world. We've got America and Australia down at the bottom here because we do a lot of work with them. They've also got very mature FM markets. I put Italy up there for personal reasons, and India because I like that their initials were the same as ours but the other way round. In fact, there are 167 national bodies who are members of ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. 126 of those are full members like BSI. They're shown in blue on this map I've listed from the ISO website. There are 810 technical committees and subcommittees within the ISO structure that undertake standards development. ISO TC, or Technical Committee 267, is the one that we have primary interest in, as that is the Facilities Management TC, or Technical Committee. It's been in existence for a little over a decade, has published 6 standards and has another 6 standards under development. For the longest time, I was frustrated that the International Organization for Standardization couldn't spell its own acronym, but in reality, ISO is actually a derivation of a Greek word, isos, meaning equal. So whatever the country, whatever the language, the short version of their name is always ISO. Now, I think that's kind of cool now that I know that. There are more regional versions of standards groups, such as CEN, Comité Européen de Normalisation, or the European Committee of Normalization or Standardization, and CEN-ELEC, which is a electrotechnical focus. CEN and CEN-ELEC bring together the national standards bodies, or NSBs, of 34 geographical European countries, including ours. I believe CEN is based in Belgium. BSI, our hosts for today, were first formed by the designer of Tower Bridge in London. Incidentally, on the day that Queen Victoria died back in January of 1901. One of the first standards that they produced was related to steel tramways. I mention that to show that standards and the built environment have always been very close bedfellows. Yes, nowadays there may be a standard for making tea, but the built environment and standards have got the longest history. There's also an element of pride for those that are in the know, as many of the standards, especially one of the best known standards around the world, originally started their lives here. I put this slide together so that we can talk about the nomenclature of standards, how they're named. You can see at the top here, we have a BS, EN, ISO. What this signifies is that the ISO standard has been adopted at both the European and a British level, the BS being the British standard and the EN being European. The one in the middle, I chose that as many will be familiar with this, and it's there so that I can talk about parts. The 19650 series all talk about BIM, or building information modeling, but there are various sections. Currently there's parts 1 to 5 published. Part 6 is well on the way, and part 0 I believe is in its infancy. They talk about, each of those parts talk about a specific subtopic. And then this one I put up here so that we can talk about wider series. So all of the 41,000 series talk about FM. They're all written about FM. As you're going to see and hear during Adrian's presentation, the 410 something something standards relate to the massively wide topic of FM, but are standalone topics in and of themselves. They may in turn have parts, like we saw up here, and we're going to go into a little bit more depth about this one specific standard. That's what Brian will be sharing his insights on later. So we've had a little look at what standards are, how they get named. Now let's have a look at how we actually use these. First off, they're guidance. So for the most part, following them is optional. There are a few near exceptions to that rule, and a list of some of those exceptions relevant to our field are found in these industry guides here. BG80 came out just over a year ago, maybe by a week or 3, and that focuses on statutory compliance. This builds on the tables that were in the 2014 version of Guide M, which is again being rewritten as we speak and is probably going to be with us later on this year. Now, what these guides do is help us understand what standards are referenced in SIs, or statutory instruments. SI, statutory instruments, are primary or secondary legislation. They get supported by approved codes of practices and government guidance. Now, in some cases, these may refer to industry guidance, including standards. For example, the Electricity at Work regulations of '89 refers to HSE, HSR, or Health and Safety Regulations 25. And that in turn relates to a British standard. So what that effectively does is mean that if you don't do what the standard says, you need to prove how what you are doing is better, or at least as good as what's written in the standard. There's another example on screen here. Generally though, these standards are there to support you. We are all busy and we don't get the white space we need in our calendars for reflection, the sort of reflection required to create new systems, processes, procedures. Sometimes we don't even get the time to polish up existing ones. And that is where these guidance documents can come into their own as a baseline to get you most of the way to the solution, and provide something that's been publicly ratified, taps into multiple experts to support your own expertise, and really bring best practice to the fore. One of the other ways that standards are used is to add a little bit of icing to your cake. I'm going to let Brian talk a little bit more about accreditation and how that can be used to benchmark you and your organization as leaders in the FM field. What can you do if you want to get involved in standards? Well, one of the easiest ways is to comment on new standards, review them and feedback on them as they come out. You do need to register on the BSI website. This is the web address that you will need to register on. It takes you to this page here. You're free to register, log in, search for the specific standard that you're looking for, and then make a difference. You can make comments on grammar, spelling, or punctuation. We're all human and can make typos and miss them. But you can also make comment on the technical side of things. So if you believe that some of the information presented is inaccurate, this is where you can feedback on that. And if you can think of something else that you could make a comment on, you have those sorts of comments too. Also on the page is ideas. You can go as far as suggesting a new topic for standardization. If you feel there is a gap, please go to this same site and share your insight. Those will all come through and be reviewed by the committees. So this is another option for people getting involved in standards. There are two standards groups that I mentioned right at the very beginning, a technical committee and a strategic committee. Adrian and I are supported by an amazing group of generous, dedicated, knowledgeable individuals. And we've got representatives from a really wide range of backgrounds. But we're always looking to diversify further and raise our inclusivity. So if you would like to have a chat about what's involved, please take a photo or a screen grab. We've got contact details on this slide and you can get in touch. At the moment, we've got a lot of projects on the go. So as you can see from the list here, this is taken off the BSI website, this one down here. We would always welcome more experts to join the cause and support our teams. So to wrap up, maybe I can go to this one. I've spoken about the NSBs that are the hub of standards creation. We've had a look at how standards can be used, and you've been given some ideas of how you too can get involved. To close, whether this is something that you have always wanted to do or something that you've just now been made aware of and inspired to get involved with, now is the time to get in contact. If you missed my contact details from the previous slide, they're on the next slide too. So all that's left for me is to thank you very much for listening to my brief introduction to standards, and remind you to use the questions feature. I've seen a few coming in as I've been chatting. Use that questions feature to send us inquiries. And the last thing for me to do is to introduce Adrian, who will be taking us on a journey through some specific FM standards. Adrian, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adrian Brooks, and as Nick said, I'm chair of FMB1. My day job, I'm a principal at Avison Young. So, what is the facility management infographic? Well, the infographic seeks to collate the range of facility management related standards that currently exist and reference them against stages of the property life cycle, which we've signposted here as stages 1 to 5. You'll also noted a number of standards that are currently under development, and I'll give you a preview of these at the end, towards the end of the presentation. I realise that the detail of the infographic on this slide is too small to read, but a full version of it is available to download, and actually the link is about to be put into the chat. For today's purpose, it's important that you're aware of what standards exist and at what stage they're typically used. But it is worth noting, as Nick referenced earlier, that many of the ISO standards in this area had their origins from the BSI committees here in the UK, so something to be proud of. We can now examine the content at each stage. However, time today prevents a detailed treatment of each standard, but I can at least give you a flavour of their content. As you might expect, some of these standards are applicable to more than one stage, and where this is the case, they're shown for completeness, but I will mention their content on the first reference of that standard. So moving into acquire space, and if we start with this stage 1, there are 3 standards referenced here. The first, 41011, provides us with a vocabulary of terms which brings clarity with definitions. As industry professionals, we take some of the terms we use for granted, but standards of this are valuable to gain consistency when dealing with those outside the industry, and especially when working across geographies. So this standard is accompanied by 41012, and which provides guidance on strategic sourcing. It provides very useful guidance on the stages of strategic sourcing, with annexes that provide an example structure of things like a business case, the key components of FM agreements, and also the related service level agreements. The final standard shown at this stage, at this early stage of the property lifecycle, is 41014, the development of FM strategy. So this standard provides a thorough treatment of the considerations in developing an FM strategy, with examples of threats and opportunities, factors affecting business strategy, and including an example with the linkage shown, importantly, between the FM requirement and the core business objectives. Design space. Well, we've got 2 standards referenced here. BS 8536, which was updated recently in 2022 and expanded. For me, the key here in the title is operability. Operability of the assets or assets delivered as part of the project. That is to say, the degree to which the asset is capable of being put into use as intended. As facility management professionals, we all recognise the benefit being involved at an early stage in the design process, so that when the facility is completed, we're familiar with how it should operate and that it does function as intended. This can range from simple storage considerations, visitor and staff journeys through the facility, to fundamental adjacencies. Aligned to the soft landings framework, this is a valuable standard for anybody taking responsibility for a facility post-change. It includes a range of example checklists and will figure elsewhere in the property lifecycle. ISO 41018 provides guidance on the development of an FM policy. The policy is a framework that sits between both the FM strategy and operational plans. It's intended to complement the guidance already included within 41001 itself and provides advice on those decisions that affect the management of the facility and the delivery of facility services. It also provides guidance for any internal or external audit programs. Construct space. As previously discussed, 8536 is also prominent throughout the construction phase. As the design evolves and moves into construction, it's important that the efficacy of the design and the operability within it are not compromised, or where changes are necessary, this operability element is properly considered. BS 8572 deals with the procurement of those facility services necessary to support the facility post-completion. Invariably, the process envisaged within this standard should start long before the construction phase is completed. This standard was complementary to the ISO 41012 strategic sourcing, and as I mentioned earlier, but it sets out the stages recommended for the procurement of these services. Included within this standard are a number of useful annexes that provide a detailed checklist of actions, an example option evaluation matrix, and an example scope of a pre-qualification questionnaire. This is a useful standard for employers, consultants, and service providers involved in the procurement process. Fit out space, move into space. 4 standards are referenced here. BS 8572 on procurement will continue again throughout this period, but also BSEN 152216 is concerned with area and space measurement within facilities management. It presents a framework for measuring floor areas within buildings and areas outside of buildings. In addition, it contains clear terms and definitions, as well as methods for measuring horizontal areas and volumes in buildings and or parts of buildings independent of their function. ISO 41014 facilities management policy remains applicable in setting up the facility, but here we reference for the first time BS 8892 transition management. This standard deals with the transition arrangements required, whether that represents the change from one service provider to another, the insourcing or outsourcing, or the setting up of operations for the first time. It recommends the adoption of a project-based approach to transition with all the components you would expect within a project, i.e. a defined scope, tasks, timelines, resources, and costs. But all of this, importantly, is within a risk-bounded environment. It's packed with useful guidance, an example Gantt chart, and a comprehensive checklist of actions. This is useful for employers, practitioners, and suppliers alike. Managed space. Well, managed space is a big area, and there's some 7 standards referenced here. The first, BS 8210, was updated in 2020 and represents an expansion of an already big area. It provides guidance on the development of facilities maintenance strategy and the key stakeholders to be involved. Excuse me. It recommends the development of a maintenance policy, the use of a facility handbook, and a series of good practice activities to ensure that assets are suitable for their intended purpose and perform their function throughout their useful life. By doing so, protect their value. This standard provides guidance on the selection of different preventative maintenance regimes and the development of relevant key performance indicators. It provides some detailed guidance to help all involved in the operation and maintenance of facility assets. BS 8544 is the standard for life cycle costing, which is in many respects complementary to 8210. It's focused on the in-use phases of facilities or constructed assets. This latter point extends the application of the standard beyond just buildings and into structures and other forms of construction. It also provides some useful guidance on the capture of asset information. Overall, it enables owners to identify the most efficient and affordable way to buy, operate, and maintain a facility or constructed asset. BS 8587 is the standard for facility information management, and it supports the efficient and effective management of this information in order to derive the optimal use and benefit from the facility itself. If we consider the component parts of this information, there's a long list, which includes drawings and specifications, operation and maintenance manuals, as well as legals and commercials, and that's really just for starters. So what is needed is a structured approach to this information so that it can be compiled, maintained, and readily communicated. BS 8587 can offer guidance in this area. It should be noted that 8587 doesn't cover the information and data required to deliver the operational asset, but includes recommended actions excuse me, to assist in safe, correct, efficient, and effective operation of the asset. 152213, this standard provides guidance on how to measure, achieve, and improve quality in facilities management, and is complementary to one of the most universally known standards, ISO 9001. It provides a link into management methods and theories and follows the plan, do, check, and act approach. It could be placed in a number of stages of the property life cycle, but as this stage is focused on the management of the space, performance of service delivery is vitally important. Excuse me. Staying with managed space, BSEN 152214, where 41011 gave us FM terminology with the clarity of terms and definitions of these, 152214 provides us a classification of processes, products, services, and activities. It adopts a product perspective and aligns with the core business activities of the organisation. Its key benefit is that it introduces a client rather than an asset-oriented view. 1521.5, this standard is all about processes and the development and improvement of them, but importantly, in support of the primary processes or core business activities. It sets out the basic principles, describes high-level FM processes, but does so from a demand perspective for an audience of all stakeholders. Now, the last one here, and that's a long title, is conformity assessment. And what is that? Well, once a standard is in place and organisations wish to be certified to that standard, then a conformity assessment is used to describe the requirements for the body certifying. This ensures that the bodies have the appropriate competencies and know what they're looking for when they carry out their audits. In this particular instance, this is the conformity standard for the FM management system 41001. So, review space, leaving space. 4 standards are referenced here. Here, facility maintenance is as applicable as is the life cycle cost. And once the decision to move or leave the space has been made, then transition management is also very pertinent. But what we haven't yet discovered is 152217. So this is standard establishes a common basis for benchmarking, whether that's facilities management costs, floor areas, environmental impact, as well as service quality, satisfaction, and productivity. It contains clear terms and definitions, as well as methods for benchmarking facilities management, whether that is products and services or facilities management organisations and their operations, a useful tool for practitioners. Well, work continues by standard makers in this discipline, and this list gives you a taste of what is to come. I'd like to pick out one of these, as the title's not necessarily the simplest. 41015, Influencing Organisational Behaviours for Improved Facilities Outcomes. In essence, what this standard is seeking to support is the use of the facility in the way it was intended. The aim is to provide recommendations and guidance on the appropriate operation of the facility, so its contribution to meeting the organisation's missions and goals can be clearly defined and measured. So, in summary, I hope that this has provided you with some insight, a taster into the range of standards that exist within our industry currently, plus a few in development, and how they can be categorised. I'd like now to hand over to Brian to talk more about the management system standard. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And very good afternoon to you all from me. As you can see, I'm involved with these two bodies within BSI. Perhaps my main interest over the years has been in developing the standards, obviously with others. It's often quite an involved task, and plenty of contributions are always appreciated. So as you know already, this is going to be a dive into what I would describe as our flagship standard. So this is ISO 41001. You've noticed already that we do with these ISO standards always have the word facility management in the title, and then after that the particular focus area. You know, therefore, that we use the word facility at the international level, whereas in the UK, of course, we're more familiar with facilities management. So what is this standard really all about? Well, it's a management system standard. It's one of approximately 50. Within that, there are two distinct types. The first of those is called a Type A, which is basically about specifying requirements. So this standard, as you can see there, specifies requirement for a management system. We see this as a structured, consistent, process-based arrangement for a business. And if you like, it's how you organize yourselves, and it's doing that in a formalized way. It is intended to be used by a facility management organization, FM organization. And I think it's important at this point just to draw a distinction between that FM organization and what we've called a demand organization. Just for practical reasons, if you're drafting a standard and understandably you're referring to an organization, it certainly helps if you're clear about which organization that you're referring to. So if you like, the word demand organization, which you can see here, refers to an owner, an operator, an owner-operator, major tenant, could even say client. They're on the demand side, and if you like, in terms of supply of FM, we have the FM organization. When we look more closely at this 41001 management system standard, we can see that it actually is very similar to the quality management system approach. It's a more developed form because, after all, facilities management is a sector, whereas quality is something very specific and can be applied across all sectors. But what is fundamental to this is that this FM system is there to be used by an FM organization to meet the needs of a demand organization. So That's, if you like, the broad approach to it. Now then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to a look at the reasons why you should go down the path of 41001 and not, as you can see here, ISO 9001. Many people have asked me, well, we all know about 9001, so why do we have to bother with 41001? Well, as you've learned already, and we can see at the top of this slide here, 9001 is generic. It's across all organisations, all sectors. But 41001 is specific to a sector, specific to facility management. And that, if you think about it, when it's defined, includes quality. It includes environmental management, energy management, occupational health and safety, security, business continuity management. The list goes on. Now, as you can see here, each one of those topics has its own management system standard. So I could actually say that if you have 41001, you've got a number of management system standards in one. You do, because it's able, because of what FM is, to cover all of these individual areas. Now, if you look at the definition of FM, and there are quite a few around, I think one word which is common to them all is integration, or integrating, and that's what FM does. It integrates multiple functions and disciplines. It is a discipline in its own right, but it does bring together in an organized way. And this is why you need to be looking at 41001 and not 9001. 9001 was the first, and the structure of that has been used for all these other management system standards. So whichever one you want to look at, let's say 45001 on occupational health and safety, or we could say 14001 on the environment, or environmental management to be more precise, you'll see that the structure is the same. It's certainly not identical, but what does set apart the individual standards are the supporting guidance. And clearly here with 41001, the supporting guidance is specific to facility management. So hopefully that gives you an idea of why we really shouldn't be going down the 9001 path. We've got our own standard and it's broad and deep. The last point on this slide here just really makes that point again about 9001 being generic. It applies across the whole organisation, and that can obviously include its own internal FM organisation, but it is limited to quality. However, 41001 covers everything that the FM organisation does. On this slide, I've got, as you can see, key points. Already, I've touched upon the important distinction that we need to make between the demand organisation and the FM organisation. Most of our standards are at the ISO level really targeted at the FM organisation in serving one or more demand organisations. A definition, in fact, of an FM organisation is in the wording on that left-hand side there, the entity responsible for facility management. And I should point out that facility management in this context is at the operational, tactical and strategic levels. And if we just move across to the second there, the FM organisation, you can see that very point. It's not enough to deliver multiple services and really succeed at being an FM organisation. There has to be management leadership. There has to be a strong management function. And what we'll be doing in the next 12 to 24 months at the ISO level is looking at how we can support FM organisations on the supply side develop themselves so that they can think and act at all levels, not just operational, not just delivering services, which is clearly important, but being able to contribute their expertise, their capabilities to demand organisations. Now, you've heard already that the underpinnings of a number of standards are the plan, do, check, act model. This is fundamental to the management system standards, of which 41,000 is our prime example here. So essentially, you plan what you're going to do, so you say what you're going to do, you get on and do it, then you check what has been done, and where necessary, you make changes to improve performance. And in this context, we do use that term continual improvement. So fundamentally, what we're doing here is setting our course. We're working towards certain objectives. We're measuring what we're doing. We're providing feedback and looking at how we can make it better. On this last point on the right here, the key components, they are just three of a number of components which we do actually include in our treatment within 41,001. It's worth pointing out that FM strategy, which we've touched on already with Adrian, is supported by its own ISO standard. So that's 41,014 FM strategy, the development of FM strategy, and that gives very clear guidance and recommendations on how you can put together a document which can be used to steer businesses towards successful outcomes, where clearly there is a high reliance not just on facility management, but space in general and improvement in the business. Policy there is covered by 41,018, coming down a level, if you like, as Adrian pointed out, that policies really sitting between the strategy and the plans. And as for the plans there, we do have currently 41,012, but there are other operational standards, if you like, which have been covered in various ways previously. Just for simplicity, you could actually regard 1 and 2, their strategy and policy, as inputs, and 3 rather more about outputs. Try to keep it simple. It needn't be complicated. What we do have now is, I hope you would agree, a suite of interlocking standards which can support anyone that is involved in facility management. Now then, let's move to the breakdown of the main sections. Well, we call them clauses. I've deliberately kept this slide to just a few words because this is where we could get into great detail, and being truthful about it, it could actually be a little bit tedious, and we certainly don't want that. So let's keep it a little bit more on a higher level. So I've put in the reference numbers there for the different clauses in the standard. The first one, therefore, is really dealing with issues faced by the organisation and how it might deal with them. Stakeholders are in there, only ISO not very keen on that term. We call them interested parties, stakeholders. It's also about the scope of the FM system. Moving across to 5, which is leadership there. What we see is, if you like, how we should approach commitment from top management in an organisation and how that permeates down through policy, FM objectives, roles and responsibilities and authorities. Planning, number 6 there, picks up risk, something which we're all aware of, a little bit of a tricky area at the best of times, threats and opportunities, and other matters that help us to understand how we can organise what it is we're doing. 7 on support is looking at resources, competencies, communication, documented information. We have to obviously make sure that we do provide the resources, the people, the supporting equipment, materials, but also we are generating data and information, and we need to make a thorough job of that. And as we move to the last two over there, we've got performance evaluation, which is really concerned with monitoring, measuring, analysing, evaluating. Audits in there, but we needn't be too concerned about that because it's a very simple case of understanding if you are doing what you say you're doing. If you're not, we can fix it. And also management review. And lastly, improvement. If we need to take corrective action, how should we think about that? So that concludes my look at the main sections. I'm just going to run down some of the benefits of implementing 41001. I suppose many of these, if you like, are easy to say, but I think that experience so far in the use of standards does support these claims. So we will see a more efficient and effective service delivery coming about. Health and safety should be our primary concern, and here we can actually see the steps that need to be taken to ensure that individuals' property are not harmed and so forth. Remember what I said earlier about 41001, integrating different functions, and amongst those, of course, we do have occupational health and safety, higher productivity, better control over the management of facilities, yes, and greater certainty of outcomes, less doubt about what is going to be achieved. It is important in a world which gets more and more complicated as we go by to be clear about communication, removing ambiguity, making sure that we're all on the same page, so to speak. And in effect, the bottom line of all of this is lower operating costs. This clearly makes sense, it matters. Now, in the current state of affairs, we are always mindful of the commitment to sustainable development. And I'm very pleased to be able to share this with you because out of the 17 sustainable development goals, we can say quite truthfully that we are supporting 8 of them. I think that's credit where credit's due. But it's also, isn't it, a realization that FM is about the built environment. It's about managing it. It's about providing for society. So what next? What shall we do next? Well, we already had a comment about accreditation. Well, accreditation is what happens with bodies that certify individual organizations. So if you are an organization that is interested in becoming certified, it's therefore a case that you are interested in implementing the requirements of 41001. And certainly it says a reasonable place to start. I think it is the place to start is to review what you do now. And it needn't be scary at all because most organizations are getting it right. Maybe there are some things which are not being done perhaps so consistently. Maybe you're missing a trick or two. But the idea is to review your existing processes, practices, procedures, and determine how you are aligned with the requirements of 41001. And I can tell you they are not onerous. Well, if you do that, basically you're looking at the gap that you need to close between what you do and what the standard requires you to do. So a gap analysis is something that I think many of you will understand and be only too happy to undertake. And therefore you get on, you make a plan for this. And all the while you're looking at, well, how can we make it better? We expect that you would work in conformity with the standard, but you are able to go beyond that. And you would understand also that getting agreement internationally is not going to, let's say, well, it's going to be at a particular level. So it has to be something that satisfies a broad church of interest, to use an expression. And so I would imagine in most cases that you would be adding to what we have as the, if you like, minimum requirements within 41001. Then what you can do is you can audit what you're doing, you can review it, and then you can move towards certification. The certification means that you have gone through a certain process and you're able to say that you're working in conformity with the requirements of this said standard. So there we are, and I'm now going to hand back to Nick so that we can look at the questions and see if we can answer them. Nick, over to you.
Well, I think it's over to all of us. Thank you very much for that, Brian. Really interesting presentation. Love that little bit about the SDGs, how many we're able to contribute to with a single standard. Adrian, Brian, if you could join me with some cameras. Do I have? There we go. We're off there. Team, we've had quite a few questions come through. Admittedly, there was a big flurry at the end for yourself, Brian. I'm going to start off with, lucky you, I'm going to start off with one that I think is perhaps for yourself, Adrian. How the standards will, the question is written, how the standards will be applicable for different type of facilities. I think the question is asking, how do you take something that's not written, it's written agnostically, and apply it to your actual facility?
Well, I think that standards by their very nature cover the, in this sector, cover the sector. So, and I think they're fairly universal. But depending on the facility and the category of asset, let's say, that you have, you're going to place emphasis in different areas. So it's really the application of it in your particular circumstance. But the rules still apply and the structures still apply. It's just, I think, where you place the emphasis. And that applies to standards generally, really, but they are universally applicable.
Thank you very much. Brian, I'm going to come to you. We have one delegate who's given us 3 questions. Thank you very much, Tommy. I actually know Tommy. I won't give a last name, but I'll go with a few of his.
A few.
yeah, he's put a few in. Thank you, Tommy.
Key.
The first one, would the benefits of adopting ISO 41001 as a demand organization, who predominantly, are there benefits, or would there be benefits, who predominantly operate an in-house FM with some externally sourced activities? It's a slightly longer question, but it is a demand organization, but it's also an FM organization.
Well, yes, I think what you've just, thank you, Nick. What you've just really described there is what is probably the most common arrangement, where you have an organisation, a demand organisation, and an internal FM organisation, and therefore it would be the FM organisation that would be implementing the standard for the benefit of its demand organisation. Of course, the demand organisation itself would probably claim externally that it had its facilities management certified in conformity with the standard, but it would be really the work of the FM organisation, the division, the department, the team there to actually work with it, to implement it, and to do all the work in preparation for it. So that is the most common situation. I think what I could just add quickly here is that we were mindful of the very many up-and-coming service provider organisations that see themselves as being able to offer something beyond just the delivery of operational level services, and therefore we need to recognise that external FM organisations do have a role to play in this, and we recognise, of course, that service provision is subject to quite widespread outsourcing. May I just, sorry to do this, but that first question that Adrian was addressing about the standards, I think I nearly said it in my presentation, but standards have to cover a lot of expectations. And one of the principles is that when it comes to the requirements or the recommendations, we suggest that you will think about scaling the approach to suit your own organisation. Yeah, you look at all of the requirements and you might think, well, that's far in excess of what we are doing. Well, fine. but we've got to cover all manner of organisations, certainly size, but yes, you can.
Absolutely. There cannot be one size fits all, but by the nature of what's written, we try and include as much relevant information as possible, and it is for people to pick and choose what's appropriate for their organisation. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Brian. And Brian, I'm going to come to you again with a sort of follow-on. Darren's jumped in and asked, if a company is providing a soft FM service, would it be better to perhaps look at 9001 as opposed to 41001? Because he's feeling that it's quite hard FM orientated, the 41001. What are your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't say 41,000 was hard, and there's no place for soft services. On the contrary, it doesn't follow that you would have to have people delivering on the operational level to, let's say, qualify or be suitable for seeking certification under 41001. I think it's more likely that in the market there will be by number more service providers offering hard services, typically the operational services, but there will be those who are offering more the consultancy services, if you like, the softer services, and this is a standard for them too. We have had a few active discussions around this, and what we want to be is inclusive. We don't see our standards as being developed to favour a particular section, let's say. We would recognise if some area is under represented, or let's say some aspect of our work is not receiving sufficient attention, and then try to deal with that. So it's for everyone. And if you read the requirements, you'll be able to see that, well, yes, we do those things, we do those. And if you're supplying the operational level, you'll see that. If you're supplying the softer services, you'll see that too. So it is for everyone. Please don't abandon the idea of 41001 and go for ISO 9001. Nothing wrong with ISO 9000. We've got our own now.
Yep, absolutely. So we are not discriminating between hard and soft. It absolutely is an inclusive standard. Thank you. We are getting close to our allotted time, so we've got probably time for just 2 more questions. For those that aren't being covered, please, Adrian and I had contact details up on the slides. Please do feel free to reach out. I'm going to take one just because it was really relevant to what I was going through, and it's just hi, how can I get involved in supporting the development of future publications? And that's just to reiterate, please reach out and contact us. We don't have a name on this one, so I can't get in contact with you, but please do reach out and get in contact with us, and we'd be happy to chat through in a lot more detail what we were lightly touching on before. And I'm going to have possibly this last one for yourself, Adrian. Okay. Do you have a standard checklist for FM? Now, I can read that in 2 different ways. One, do you have a checklist of standards for FM, or do you have a standard, a regular checklist for FM activities? So I'll let you answer both of those.
Yeah, well, I'll tackle both those, hopefully. Well, what we've gone through this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, and in terms of the infographic, splitting it across the different stages of the property life cycle, is probably the, is a fairly comprehensive list at this moment in time of the standards that exist in this space. And clearly there's a few more to come from the last slide that I put up there. So in terms of that list, but obviously there's the BSI website to reference as well as the infographic on that. In terms of checklists themselves for FM, then there are a number of the standards that, and hopefully I highlighted some of those, where there's some detailed information within them and some very good and useful guidance and checklists. Whether that's transition management, whether that's the the maintenance management standard, etc. There's some really good stuff in there, and depending on which stage you're at of the property life cycle. So there's at a micro level, there are some checklists in there, and then at the macro level, obviously you've got the infographic and BSI's website.
Adrian, thank you very much for a really good answer to that one, and you've managed to time it exactly right. We are bang on time, so all that remains is for me to thank Adrian, thank Brian for your very nice, succinct presentations, and of course to thank everyone who's attended. We really appreciate being able to spread the work that we're doing, and hope that that's been of interest to you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your days, and hope to see you on the next one. Good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.